API-led connectivity starts with an API-led architecture. And in this architecture, what we're trying to do are create reusable components that we can quickly use to create and assemble, compose new APIs very, very quickly. To illustrate this, we'll use a simple example of aggregating account records. And we all have accounts records stored across multiple different systems within the organization, and it's often a use case where we need to pull those together from multiple different sources. What makes that hard, makes that difficult for developers, is that in each of these different back-end systems, account information is represented differently. It looks one way in Salesforce, it looks another way in SAP, it looks yet another way in the database, and so we have different formats for how the data is stored. We have different protocols that are required to use to access that information in those back-end systems. We have different authentication methods and how we're authorized to get that information. And some stuff runs on-prem and some stuff runs in the cloud. Combine all this together and it makes it very, very difficult for the different integration teams to get that information. And then you add to that the point that every time a new application comes on board, typically they're having to integrate with that back-end database to get account records out. They have to do the same thing with SAP. So every one of those developers has to know how to talk to SAP and where to find the objects and how to authenticate and to do all that against SAP. And then the same thing with Salesforce in this example. So every one of these developers is having to learn those 4 basic principles of how to deal with protocols, authentication, how to orchestrate to get the information and transform that in the manner that they need it. Now, we're doing that across all these different applications. What it also means is that I'm reducing my ability, my corporate agility, because I'm tied directly into these back-end systems. And this is why when organizations are faced with retiring an application or bringing in a new application, whether it be through merger acquisition, we're usually talking about it's a multi-year effort and it's going to take millions of dollars to do that. And so what some people have said is microservices is going to fix all this. Well, that'd be great if it did, but typically microservices are only addressing one piece of this, which is dealing with the protocol and exposing these backends through HTTP instead of whatever protocol they're using. But the data is still represented in the format of that source system, and we still have to then know how to authenticate, orchestrate, and transform that data in all these different back-end systems. Another approach that people say is, I'll just use the vendor APIs. Well, while the vendor APIs will deal with the protocol and you've got your authentication in there for that particular vendor, it's different across all of them. But more importantly, there's nothing to protect you from those vendors changing their APIs. And in fact, if you were using the Twitter API, you know that pain. They used to have a single API, the Twitter API, that people could call and send tweets with. Now that's broken up into 3 different APIs, and you have to go change every one of those integrations you built to Twitter to that original API. That's why vendor APIs don't protect you. Also think about when vendors make changes to their APIs, it might break your application. So vendor APIs do not protect you and provide very little value in those. So we introduced the concepts of system APIs a few years ago, and what we're really trying to do with these system APIs is democratize connectivity to these back-end systems. And by hiding the complexities of these back-end systems in the system layer, what we're doing is taking that unique format or custom format, vendor proprietary format of the data and exposing it to a common format that's up here. Also in this tier, we're doing all of the orchestration necessary to expose the account information to that common contract. You may be calling 3 different BAPIs in SAP to get that information, or 4 different APIs in Salesforce to get account information, or 5 different tables in my database. Doesn't matter. All that's hidden in that system API layer and exposed in a common format. So that makes it easy for others to be able to access that and in effect, democratizing that connectivity. Now we take it a step further, and what we're doing is showing how all that stuff goes away. All of this protocol authentication orchestration goes away, and I'm just calling these APIs to get that information that's out there. Significantly easier. It also allows me that as changes happen in the different back-end vendor-provided systems or in my database, I can make those changes in the system layer and not impact the consumers. And that significantly reduces how many times we have to go and make changes in those integrations. Now we take it a step further. We say, if you created an API that sat in front of all of these to aggregate account information, then those source systems out there wouldn't have to call 3 APIs. They could just call a process API called account that would go out and in parallel get all the information from all these different systems and then merge those results together and provide the aggregated account list back. That makes it much easier for people. They don't have to worry about what systems are providing that information. And so now when we're doing the integrations, we just call the account API. It orchestrates what it means to construct the set of account records within my organization at this time. That allows me to bring in a new application, like maybe another instance of Salesforce, so I can just add that to the account API. We aren't changing any integrations at this level. If I bring in or retire the SAP instance, again, we're not changing any of the integrations. We're just because they're all calling the account API that's sitting there. If we bring in Magento, we're never making a change. We're aggregating that together. So it gives me the agility to, as systems come and go, to be able to not have to go and change all those integrations that we would have in a typical point-to-point integration strategy. Now, the other thing that we're doing is as we think about having this layer, I am going to have a need to be able to adapt that account information that's coming out, probably in a JSON format if we're building it today, to specific consumers. You know, if SAP needs this in an XML format, we use these experience APIs to adapt the process APIs that we've created here to whatever a particular consumer needs. Or if I'm doing EDI integrations and I need an 850 format, this is where we would do that transformation. And so the experience layer is that adaptive layer that allows me to take my standard process APIs that we've created and be able to adapt them to a specific use case or a specific consumer's needs. Now, what we've done by taking this API-based approach is eliminated the need to worry about systems of record. In the old days, and you know, if you come from an MDM world, we always talk about what's the system of record for these attributes or those attributes, or this set of records and that set of records. We've moved away from that. Now we've moved to a service of record where the consumers don't care about systems of record anymore. Those systems of record can change on a daily basis. And they probably don't change that often, but they do often change. This gives us a way to go out here and actually provide a service that's going to give me the information I'm looking for and therefore insulate me from changes in those systems of record. And that's how we go about building what we call an application network. By having these different layers of abstraction, the different layers of isolation, we're providing different nodes in the network. Then we are simply combining nodes in the network on an as-needed basis to come up with new process APIs or expose experience APIs to new channels that we might have out there. Give us the control and the flexibility that is required in today's business climate.